Well, g'day, folks. Welcome to the Awaken Network podcast. I'm John Tyson, lead pastor of Church of the City in New York, and I'm joined by Chad Bohai, who is the lead pastor of Radiant Central Coast, and Sam Gibson, who leads Pray NYC in New York City. Thanks for joining us. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about prayer, revival, awakening, and what it looks like to seek God for another move of the Holy Spirit in our time. It's great to have you with us. Well, g'day, folks. Welcome back. This is what episode are we on here, guys?
We're on episode 6.
Episode 6, season 2, building a life of prayer.
Come on.
And what we want to do in this session, we've just listed out our 4 pillars of building a life of prayer. What we want to do in this session is just learn from Jesus himself on prayer. There's a beautiful book called With Christ in the School of Prayer.
Yes.
And I think that's really what we want. A lot of times people want to read books by the latest charismatic prophet who's going to give you breakthroughs and decrees that you've never heard of, or your favorite conservative theologian who's going to unpack. Listen, I love to read. We just shared about a bunch of books we love to read, but there's nothing more important than learning what Jesus said on prayer himself. So in this passage here, we're just going to share each of our favorite teachings from Christ on prayer, or the favorite moments from his life, and then what you got out of it. So why don't you start for us, Sam? When you think of prayer and the ministry and life of Jesus, what do you get from Christ?
Oh, absolutely. Just to double down on this, there are so many different theological camps and prayer spaces, and I've found that running in prayer, a lot of pastors and leaders are afraid of what about this? And it's it's kind of on a road from the south, you drive into ditches sometimes. It's you want to avoid the ditches. And the best thing for a prayer culture, personally, but also just avoiding the ditches of getting swept up into politics or getting swept up into the latest trend, is being discipled by Christ himself. It is, if you don't find it in Jesus' life, you might want to stay a little bit away from it. You know what I mean? It's just and he just is this true north in a lot of spaces. And so for me, most people go to Luke 11, but I personally would say probably the most marking for me is Luke 18. Context here is Jesus gives a parable. Luke 18, it begins with, it says, Jesus told them this parable, and it says to the effect that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. So it's hey, before I begin this parable, which rarely happens.
Yes.
Before I tell you the parable, I'm saying this because you're going to pray and you're going to lose heart. So let me go ahead and equip you on the front end. When you start losing heart, let me give you this. And it says there's a unrighteous judge who fears neither God nor man. There's a widow in the town who has an issue with her adversary. And the widow keeps bringing her case before this judge. She's got a case against the adversary, but she keeps bringing it before the judge. And this, I think, is so significant, but basically it says the judge eventually grants her justice, not because his heart is moved, not because she said the right words. It says that I will give her justice so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming. And it's just the thing I think in the context of prayer I kind of grew up in, and I think the thing that was lacking the most is just it's almost like prayer's like the make-a-wish moment. I threw the quarter into the pond and I made a wish and God didn't do it. And it's Jesus actually teaches on prayer very differently. He talks about this level of persistence.
Yes.
He talks about this level of beating down the door. I'm not letting go. I think this is helpful in the lens of spiritual warfare. She never once addresses the adversary. Man, I think one of the biggest areas, I'm super aware of spiritual warfare, but we've given so much credit to darkness in prayer spaces. We've got more people walking around aware of demonic powers and principalities than they are about the kingdom of light. And just this revelation of, hey, she has an adversary, that's a real thing, but she's going to the person who has real authority over that. Yeah. She's addressing the judge. And I think so often we're trying to bypass the judge and go straight to the adversary, and it's you're getting in the wrong fight. And just this idea, and it goes on and basically says when the Son of Man comes to the earth, and this is the last tie in here that just really, I think, marks me, will he find faith on the earth? So the connection between what is faith? Well, according to this parable, Jesus says is persistence in prayer. When he comes, we talk about faith all the time. Every tradition is talking about faith to some degree, but it's actually, what reveals a lack of faith? Prayerlessness. And so this is like a marker of my life. Isaiah 64:7 is like my life verse. It says, there's no one who calls upon the name of the Lord who stirs himself up to lay hold of him.
What a phrase. Stirs themselves up to lay hold of God.
And I've just made this like, when no one calls upon your name, not in arrogance, I'm going to call upon it. I am stirring myself up. If there's no one who's stirred up to lay a hold of you, because it's not from arrogance, it's from confidence. God, I know what your word says. I know your character and your nature. I'm not letting go. And man, I just want to be the persistent widow who beats down the door of my continual coming. Like, I'm just laying a hold of this and I am not letting go. And I think this is one of the areas that we're probably the least discipled in prayer, is just the persistence and the going again. And Jesus saying, hey, you're going to lose heart. Let me go ahead and equip you on the front end. Persistence matters in this thing. You're in a fight.
Yeah.
Stay in the fight. So that's probably one of my biggest teachings. He goes on with another teaching in Luke 18, but I would say this one's probably the one that marks me the most. So how about for you guys?
Persistence in prayer. And again, what is Elijah? Elijah, we've touched on this, but Elijah gets the revelation from God to go and pray for rain. And what does he do? He prays. He says, go check. Nothing. Pray
go again.
John Eldridge calls this getting rid of the zap view of God. It's like no intercessors in the Bible believed in a zap view of God.
That's exactly right.
One time, done. They were people who were contending, building a life of pressing through. And yeah, you see that in the life of Elijah. You see that in the life of Daniel. He's fasting, but there's a delay in the heavenlies. And learning to be persistent in prayer. We are a fickle generation. We're an immediate generation.
Yes.
I'm angry if I can't get a book on Kindle. And in New York, you get same-day delivery on most things. And I'm like, I can't wait to this afternoon.
I need it in the hour.
Today for the fifth. And there's that service that gets at you in an hour. And I'm like, I literally need it right now. I can't wait an hour.
A go again spirit.
We're so used to just getting things immediately. I think that's one of Jesus' key teachings. So I love that. Chad, when you think of Jesus' teaching on prayer, what sort of stuck out to you or what stood your heart?
Yeah, one of the things, just like practically speaking, that have marked my own personal devotion and the kind of prayer meeting I want to help be a part of leading a prayer in a church is how significant. We were talking before this episode. We know a lot has been done with the Lord's Prayer. We know that. It's amazing. But in practicality, how the whole first half of the prayer, Jesus helps us to pray out of a God-saturated, out of his sovereign power, out of his holiness, out of his desire to flood the earth with his kingdom domain and reality. So we're not going to unpack. I'm not going to sit and walk line upon line, but pray out of relationship, pray out of God's perspective, worship, consecration, intercession, anticipate all of that. Your kingdom come, your will be done. But to me, my big takeaway there is I want when I lead a prayer meeting, when I pursue God in personal prayer, I want it to be thoroughly God-focused, God-exalting, God-centered, saturated, so that many of the things I bring into prayer, whether in a corporate meeting or my personal devotion, a lot of those things end up getting taken care of because of the vision of God, our Father in heaven. Hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done.
So rich.
Oh, and by the way, I do have things I need to bring before you because I'm supposed to cast my anxieties on you. I'm supposed to ask, seek, and knock, etc. But to me, I love Jesus giving us a template that obviously he lived out of, I only do what I see. I only do what I hear. I only go where he says go. And so I feel like the Lord's Prayer in both Matthew chapter 6 and then Luke chapter 11 it's more than just literally pray these few sentences and your prayer time is done. Each one is an invitation to explore something of the grandeur and goodness of God, his nature, who he is, what he's promised, what he's doing. And I try to lead that way. If you're ever in a meeting where we're praying together, we're going to spend a healthy amount of our time beholding, exalting, and throning. And in that space, when he's lifted up, he lifts our hearts, he lifts our eyes and our minds. And out of that place of that Ephesians 2 reality, being seated with Jesus, I want to agree with the great intercessor, Jesus. So I'm praying that 1 John 5, 13 through 15, I'm praying according to his will. So I'm going to receive what I'm asking because I've spent so much of that front-loaded time that Jesus teaches us, our Father in heaven, getting his perspective, settling my heart in his promises, in his goodness and glory, and the promise of his kingdom coming on earth as it is in heaven.
Dude, it was just a quick time out. You know, the A.W. Tozer quote is so famous. I think it's so important. Knowledge of the holy. He says, proper view of God solves 10,000 other problems in your life. And it's like, so often prayer spaces are like, let me bring my 10,000 problems to God. And it's like, no, you come up here. It's just like the proper view of God solves 10,000 other problems in a person's life. And it's exactly what you're saying.
And just a simple word to pastors, leaders, prayer, people passionate about prayer, whatever age you are, you're high school or you're college, whatever age on the spectrum. This is why people usually don't like going to prayer meetings, because we start with us and our mess instead of God, His glory, His grandeur. So it just if you're thinking about starting a prayer meeting or a prayer room, like purposely with all kindness and pastoral grace and compassion, just try to keep that thing aimed up and out before you go in and around. And that's Jesus lived that lifestyle. He's the master. He's the intercessor.
I've referred to it this way. It's like people want to address their needs. What they need is a vision of God. You know what I'm saying? It's like, in the end of the day, it's part of like leading people in this space of like, I know this is what you think you want, but I'm giving you what you actually need here. And this is the thing that people will thank you for later long term. It's like, the part of the monastic tradition was 1 hour of prayer that shifted the next 23 hours of your life. It's like, it is this 1 hour of verticality alignment that begins to shift the rest of your day.
Wow.
It's like I say that often. Hey, my win for you is you walk out of here with a higher view of God than when you walked in the door, because it will shift the rest of your day.
It's so funny. I remember when the prayer of Jabez sold millions and millions of copies.
Expanded.
And I think it was Hank Hanegraaff, Bible Answer Man, who wrote a book called The Prayer of Jesus. And we forget this. We forget how explicit the disciples come to Jesus and they say, it's sort of like what you're saying about that Luke 18 passage. Teach us to pray. And he goes, okay, when you pray this. And we're like, no, but we can do better than that. We found an obscure Old Testament thing that's going to become a bestseller. And, increasing my territory. Listen, it's already here. Kingdom on earth as it is in heaven.
That's it.
Increase your territory.
This is Jesus' greatest teaching on prayer. One thing I love when you look at this passage here, Jesus teaching on prayer, Luke 11, it starts off by giving us the content of prayer. Here's the Lord's Prayer. So he says, when you pray, say. And then he says this, then Jesus gives us the attitude that we should pray. He tells us the parable of the friend who comes at midnight. And he says, but when he sees your shameless audacity, he tells us this is the spirit in which we should pray. Then he gives us hope to pray about our experience of prayer. I say to you, ask and it'll be given to you. Seek and you find. Knock and the door will be open. So Jesus says your experience of prayer will be receiving, finding, and having open doors. Then he talks about the heart of God for us in prayer.
As the Father.
If you ask for a fish, he's not going to give you a snake. If you ask for an egg, he's not going to give you a scorpion. He's going to give you the Holy Spirit. And then the next section is Jesus and Beelzebub, which is the importance of making sure that we have the power because of Jesus' resurrection to bind the strong man. So it's like, here is Jesus taking you to school in prayer. Here's what you should pray. Here's how persistent you should be in prayer. Here's the attitude. Here's your expectation. Here's what prayer will do. It's an absolute masterclass. And so I think it's so important that we marinate in these verses and really get our hearts set on what Jesus is. Now, all that being said, I think my favorite section on Jesus' prayer,
take us there.
Jesus is in Gethsemane. I want to read a quote. This is from Haddon Robinson, extraordinary preacher. And he says this. So this is about Jesus in Gethsemane and what prayer does when a person is facing pressure. So it says this, where was it that Jesus sweat great drops of blood? Not in Pilate's hall, nor on his way to Golgotha. It was in the Garden of Gethsemane. There he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. Had I been there and witnessed that struggle, I would have worried about the future. If he is so broken up when all he is doing is praying, I might have said, what will he do when he faces a real crisis? Why can't he approach this ordeal with the calm confidence of his 3 sleeping friends? Yet, when the test came, Jesus walked to the cross with courage, and his 3 friends fell apart and fell away. And what I love about this vision of Jesus' teaching is that Jesus uses prayer to fuel his spirit to get faith and courage to go to the horrors of the cross. And a lot of times, and so he's praying before he goes, he's so praying from the cross. But I love this vision of prayer, which is bring it to the Lord in prayer before the crisis and ask for courage to face the crisis. When you go back and you read the lives of the martyrs, when you read the life of Luther before he goes on trial, they steady themselves in prayer, commit themselves to the Lord, receive help and hope, and then they just walk out and handle it.
Man.
And I love that vision. And so I think a lot of times the last thing we feel like we want to do when we're under stress, we want our friends to talk to us. I'm really beat down. Will you come over? I want to share my heart with you. I love the comfort of friends. I love Christian community. But there's nothing like bringing your drama to God. Psalm 55:22, cast your cares on the Lord and he will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. And so here is Jesus casting his burden on the Lord. He's got sustenance in his spirit and he's not shaken. He trusts his Father, he's wrestling with the Father, and he gets the courage he needs. And so I've always loved this scene. And whenever I've faced hard moments in my life, I've always tried to say, Lord, please, I want to wrestle with you in private so I have courage in public.
That's exactly right.
I want to sweat the blood now so that when I'm on the cross, I can look at and think of other people. I can speak to people who need salvation when I'm being crucified. I can look at my mother and make sure that her needs are cared for. I don't have a self-focus because I've already know that I've entrusted myself to you. And so I've always loved this scene about Jesus bringing his burdens and concerns to the Lord.
I was recently, John's son, Nate, is serving alongside of us, doing an internship. I was just talking to him about his story, his testimony. I know a lot about it, been around him. And I just asked, hey man, talk to me about your journey of faith. John's got an intentional father. All this stuff is out there. It's moving. What's some marking moments? Oh, he said, without a doubt, my dad is preaching this sermon series, a controversial Jesus sermon series. He says the first time, John is not in the room. We're on a subway back from Brooklyn. He goes, I'm watching my dad and realize he is waging war. He is staying up late reading books. I am waking up hearing my dad cry out for heaven's help. And he goes, it marked me so deeply in that moment because I realized he understands the moment he's in. And it's just, dude, you actually, you're saying it, but your son has seen it.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's this is
I've never heard that. That's you. I've never heard that story before.
No, it's like, I'm not trying to get too personal here, but he's like, it's not like, I've got this hot, controversial topic I want to talk through. It is, I am wrestling with the powers and principalities of the air here. I need heaven's help. I'm preparing for war. I'm reading the books. I'm reading the text. I'm immersing myself. And he's like, I am watching my dad stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning, being up at 5 a.m., 4 a.m., crying out to God, asking for he's like, it is just this exhaustion in this battle that he's in. And so, man, I think it's so important in that space of we want to be able to stand in public. We've seen the Christian, in the West in particular, just feel has been so shaken by culture. We've just been so shaken in a moment, an hour of testing. We're just scattering everywhere. It's so significant. I'd love to hear what your other insights are here. But even in the garden, I think there's such a beautiful insight to prayer that we've just so lost. We want to talk to friends. We want whatever. Jesus invites his 3 closest friends. Doesn't invite all 12. He says, hey, will you guys come and pray with me? And he takes them a little bit deeper into the garden. And he says, you guys stay here and watch and pray. And it says, and Jesus went a little bit further.
A stone's throw.
And man, just the insight, I think, to Jesus had this revelation of if you pray and you pray and I pray, we all connect to the God. We're praying together.
Yeah.
We've almost made sometimes your prayer can become.
Oh, that's good, man.
No,
that's good.
It's I genuinely, it's when people are hey, what can I do for you? I'm please just pray for me.
Yes.
I mean that from the deepest place of my heart. I need that more than I need a meal. I need that more than I need financial generosity. I'm so grateful for those external actions. But man, you whispering my name before the Father in heaven that's sending heaven's help on my behalf. Thank you. And we've just made that such a thing. I'll pray for you real quick. And it's that insight for me, I think, has freed me up to so often in a corporate prayer space, it's let me minister to you, let me minister to you. And I'm all about ministry to people, but it's man, there's a moment that Jesus needs help. And he's asking his friends, would you pray with me?
Bro, that is so profound, mate. Because often what do we want? We end up with Job's friends.
Yes.
Opinions on why we end up with theological speculation. in self-righteousness, moral judgment, all these sorts of things. And Jesus was like, I want you with me, not to chat. I want you with me to pray. So folks, we want to encourage you. We want to say to you, learn from Jesus.
Yes.
Jesus is the one that shows us. Read the Gospels. One of my mentors said to me, never leave the Gospels. And it's a part of why I always read the lectionary as opposed to any other Bible reading plan, because I've got the Gospels every day. Jesus is the most effective man of prayer who's ever lived. He's living to make intercession for us. He's giving us these clear teachings. When you pray, pray this. I'm going to teach you to do this so you don't lose heart. So we want to just call you back to building your life of prayer from the teachings of Jesus himself. We're all for mentors. We've all had incredible mentors. We're all for books. We love books. We're all for resources, but you will learn more by reading the Gospels and obeying Jesus' teaching than you will doing anything else, including this podcast. So why don't you this week take some time, get with the Gospels, wrestle with the passage, and ask God to increase your capacity to pray like Jesus. Thanks for being a part of this. It's a joy to be with you. Hopefully this has pointed you deeper into your prayer life with Jesus, and we'll see you next episode.